I changed the beneficiary on my late husband's life insurance the week his sister told the funeral director I'd never really been part of this family. Marcus died on a Tuesday, aneurysm. He was 51, he just had a physical in October. Everything came back fine and we were supposed to go to Portugal in the spring. That's kind of where my head was when the phone rang. We'd been arguing, like genuinely going back and forth about whether to start in Lisbon or Porto, and then everything just stopped. We'd been married 9 years, no kids together, though we'd talked about it early on and eventually decided we were happy the way we were. His family, his mother Dolores, his sister Renee, his brother Cal, had always been this tight unit that I was sort of adjacent to. Welcome at Sunday dinners, not in the group chat, not consulted when decisions got made. Marcus always said they were slow to warm up, that it wasn't personal, that they were just like that with everyone at first. I'd been married to him for 9 years when he died. I think I aged out of at first a while back. The day of the funeral, Renee ran things. She picked the flowers, chose the readings, talked to the funeral home. Nobody asked me anything, and honestly I was so far underwater I didn't push. I just kept trying to stay upright. At some point I noticed the seating. She'd arranged it so she and Dolores sat directly behind the casket while I ended up in the second row, behind his sister and his mother. I sat down and didn't say a word because I was not going to rearrange chairs at my husband's funeral. I didn't find out what Renee had said until afterward. One of the funeral home staff, young woman, maybe 22, clearly uncomfortable, came up while people were filing out and said she was sorry for my loss, and then she said, I overheard something earlier and I felt like I couldn't not tell you. I asked her what she meant. She said before the service, Renee had pulled the funeral director aside and told him his wife was never really part of this family. For today, please just work directly with us on everything. I just stood there. I thanked her and walked out to my car. I sat there for a long time. The rest of that week was casseroles and people I barely knew sitting in my living room. Renee came by twice, going through what she called Marcus's personal effects, which mostly seemed to mean anything she recognized from before me. I didn't have the energy to stop her. Dolores called once, cried, didn't ask how I was doing. Cal sent a single text and that was the last I heard from him. Nobody brought up the practical stuff. Nobody asked me if I needed anything. They were grieving Marcus, and I understood that, but so was I, and I was also the one sleeping in our bed alone. Now, Marcus had a life insurance policy through his job, $400,000. He'd taken it out before we met, and the beneficiary had always been Renee. We talked about updating it maybe a year before he died. I told him, honey, you really need to do that, and he'd agreed and said he'd fill out the HR form. I knew going in that money was going to Renee regardless of anything I said or did. But Marcus also had a personal policy, $175,000, taken out after we got married, with me listed as the primary beneficiary. That one had a provision that let me as the primary designate who the secondary beneficiary was, meaning who'd receive the funds if something happened to me before distribution. He'd set it up in our first year and never touched it again. Renee was still listed as the secondary. I changed it that Friday, 4 days after we buried him. I sat at my kitchen table with the paperwork, and I thought about what that young woman told me, and I thought about the second row, and I changed the secondary beneficiary to my sister. Then I filed everything, and didn't mention it to a single person. 3 weeks later, Renee called. She'd apparently been in touch with Marcus's HR department, trying to get a picture of his full estate, work policy, 401k, anything she could find. Someone there had mentioned multiple policies. She called me wanting details. She said, I'm just trying to make sure everything gets handled properly. Did Marcus carry any personal insurance beyond work? I said yes. There's a personal policy. Who's the beneficiary? I am. I'm listed as primary. And the secondary? I said my sister. She went quiet. Then, excuse me? I said I updated it a few weeks ago. The policy allows me to do that. Her voice went tight. Marcus would have wanted that money to go to his family, to his mother, to us. And something in me went completely still. I said, Renee, I was his family. You told the funeral director I wasn't, but I was his wife for 9 years. So I made the decision a wife makes. She said, I was under so much stress that day. I didn't mean it like that. I was just trying to I said, I know exactly what you meant.